Space has become the most promising sector in India in the last decade. With private players now in the game, India is venturing into areas that it had never dreamt of. To speak about the work that is happening in the sector and how promising the possibilities are in the coming years, we have with us today Yashas Karanam. He is the co founder of Bellatrix Aerospace. Bellatrix is a Bengaluru based space company, which was one of the first startups to dip its toes in the Indian space tech industry. And they are now doing some really exciting work in the area of sustainable space technology. Thank you for speaking with us today, Yashas.
Thanks for having me.
Yashas, I'm going to jump right into the questions. And my first questions, of course, is going to be about Bellatrix. How
Right.
did Bellatrix start off, and what has your journey been like?
Yeah. So I think our formative days was mostly back in our college project days, right? I think we wanted to crack a different kind of technology as part of the college project, get a patent, and crack something in the technical area. My other co-founder Rohan actually was really fascinated with propulsion tech and propulsion tech for satellites specifically. Satellites, rockets, I think he was a propulsion geek, but I think satellite propulsion was one area which was really maturing and evolving at that time. I'm talking of 2012, right? I was still in my class 12. Rohan had just got into engineering. And the idea was to create a new technology in a domain called electric propulsion or electric engines for satellites. And what we realized was it was a new sector. Industry just had started adapting it. There was a highly successful and famous Boeing satellite, which for the first time adapted this in a commercial mission. And that happened in 2012. Around the same time we started, it was all in the news. And this Boeing's, I think if I recollect, the name of the satellite was 702 SP. It was the first commercial electric propulsion engine, and people were really in awe because it was probably carrying about 2.2, 2.3 times the normal payload carrying capacity of a satellite of that class. So that way, I think you would get 2.2 times more ROI from that kind of a satellite. So it was an emerging tech. And if you looked at the players who were actually doing that, it was the Russians who were the original inventors. And of course, US and Europe had adapted it in different versions, but Russians were the pioneers in this electric propulsion technology. And the main drawback or challenge was one, the technology was closely guarded. These agencies had the close grip of this. It was not a publicly published information. And second, these engines or these technologies were extremely expensive, and the fuel they used was also quite expensive. So we were looking at possibly using a very efficient and affordable alternate propellant and see if there are alternate technologies which could actually crack it. So one of the ideas that Rohan came up was, why don't we use water as a propellant? Just the normal drinking water, not any specialized treated water and all that. So experiment started there, and we were fortunate to get funded by some HNIs, notable one being Jindal Steels, as students again. And that funding really helped us take this off and take it to the next level in terms of developing a complete tech, while at the same time also trying to build a thesis or a theory part to it. So it was a hardware plus physics kind of experiment that became successful, and we were able to crack one of the world's first electric engine which uses water as fuel. So I think with that we were trying to see what more to do and how to deal with things going forward. One of the ambitions or aspirations was to probably go to the US, study in one of the Ivy League universities, come back to India. But then we realized we had already built a team which had built something that these universities were also still developing, right? So we thought, if that is the case, why don't we try to look at commercializing it? And that's when Bellatrix was born. Me and Rohan co-founded this company with the idea that Rohan would look at tech, I would take care of almost all things other than tech. And I was also kind of involved at this company during the development stage from my electronics purview, but most of the core tech was built by Rohan, and we had a team of 3 more members. That's how kind of things started off. But I think after that is one critical juncture which actually changed things. We were trying to tap into ISRO and see if ISRO could give some sort of a validation to this tech that would really help us make this a commercial product. So fortunately, chairman of ISRO at that time, Kiran Kumar sir, actually had come to my college for my super seniors convocation. I just happened to bypass all the security and just hand him over a one pager which had some of the photos of the product, graphs, test results, all of that. And he saw this and he was amazed. He was like, "Is this something you guys have really done?" Right? He said, "Yes, sir, we have really done this hardware." Then he said, "This is what ISRO has been really looking for. And if I can't support you as a chairman, then what purpose am I serving? I really want to support you guys and take it forward." Right? From there, that was really a good sign of leadership also, right? Personally, for us, it was really astonishing to see somebody like chairman of ISRO talking to a student and saying, "I really want to support you guys. I'll do whatever it takes to do that." Right. From there, I think we had a really good experience working with ISRO. We got an order from ISRO and subsequently delivered the system. And from there, we also started talking to global companies. We were talking to the Boeing's, Thales's, Airbuses of the world, trying to understand what challenges they are facing in the propulsion domain. And if we were an aspiring company who wanted to be a supplier of choice, what are the things that we have to develop? So that kind of led to some 2, 3 revelations for us. One was the supply chain was a little constrained. There were only a handful of companies who could really deliver space grade propulsion technology, who had that kind of reliability. And because it was kind of like the demand was always higher than the supply, the lead times had spiked up. It was irrationally high. And they were looking at a supplier who was both reliable and could also deliver quickly. And second, people felt the costs that people were charging because of that kind of a monopoly situation was really high. Right? We saw that as another opportunity. And third, coming to the tech part, all the propulsion tech that existed in the market were all built to the bigger geostationary satellites, which orbit at around 36,000 kilometers. So from 1950s till I think 2015, mostly everybody went to geostationary orbit. That was the go-to orbit for any satellite. But from 2015 onwards, with SpaceX cutting down the costs and a lot of VC money started flowing into the space industry because SpaceX was a star, right? Everybody saw that as a success. And a lot of investors started pouring money into startups, and startups realized coming lower and closer to Earth has a lot of benefits, both in terms of the way you could use satellites and the benefits you could extract out of it, as well as the economics of it and the way you can scale, right? If your satellite's capacity in geo is say X and your market potential is only X by 2, you could simply do that with half the cost in LEO by putting a constellation of multiple satellites instead of just one satellite. So this market actually created a technical gap. So the companies which had propulsion engine technology all had the engine technology for the bigger ones. The smaller one was a new segment getting created, and all of a sudden the entire industry shifted from GEO to LEO. I think today 80% plus of all the satellites going up are in LEO. So we wanted to be that new leader in this new segment which got created, and we started creating 4 unique products which all started catering to every segment of satellite. So we wanted to be that one-stop shop for space. Yeah, so I think that's how the journey started. I think we have come a long way, and there were, of course, challenges with regard to not being able to import things to India, which kind of forced us to indigenize and build a lot of tech in-house. And building that kind of capabilities within the country, right? So you don't get people off the shelf who understand propulsion tech for satellites. It's only ISRO which has that kind of expertise. So having to do that, I think it took some years, but I believe we have built a good company and a good culture which was able to reinvent the wheel and do this here in India. I think things started when my co-founder Rohan was selected to a prestigious NASA event, and he had the opportunity to meet Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong and go to NASA's centers there, see the propulsion tech which is actually being built, right? So he got to see the state of the art in this particular sector. That gave him a lot of inspiration. But I think what really added to it is after he came back to India, it was in a lot of local newspapers that Indian kid was selected for this kind of a conference. And that actually came to attention of former President Dr. Abdul Kalam sir. And he was really interested to see what Rohan was up to. And he called Rohan to his office and understood all that work which was going on in this area, and finally said this is something India really needs. India is actually lagging behind in this particular technology, and he really wants to see Indian youths take up the baton and build things on the propulsion tech. And that was really a very good inspiration for us to kind of start seriously working in this area and actually build a company like Bellatrix. And also at the same time, he also gave us a letter of recommendation, which really helped us raise the first few checks in terms of funding for this.
Yashas, you did
Mm.
speak about your work on sustainable space tech, and that's a very unique
Yeah.
work that you're doing, not just in India but globally, because
Mm.
now the world is moving towards
Yeah.
reusable, spacecrafts, propulsion systems. A very unique work that you're doing is on green propulsion.
Correct.
So, could you tell us a little bit about how what your work has
Mhm.
been around that, and also are there more projects on sustainable space tech that Bellatrix is looking at?
Yeah, obviously. So we want to also position Bellatrix as a company which only does green and
Mm.
sustainable tech, right? That had been one of the agendas. If you looked at propulsion for satellites, traditionally, there was a technology called chemical propulsion. It's not was, there is, it is
Mm.
still a prominent technology. It's called chemical propulsion. So with chemical propulsion, the one major challenge is the fuels that people use for this kind of propulsion is basically using a toxic chemical called hydrazine. It's extremely dangerous. In fact, studies have shown that a lot of people who work in the factories which produce hydrazine are developing cancers in their late 40s. So there are also human health hazards which are associated with it. And second, basically the gases and the chemicals that you release from these factories are also not very easy to treat. They're very toxic. And people have to go into these factories wearing a suit called hazmat suits, which in a common man's terms technically looks like an astronaut capsule, right? You need to either carry your own oxygen cylinder and go inside the factory and produce this chemical, or you need to go in with these suits where you get oxygen pipes directly sending you oxygen to breathe in. Because even small ppm levels of these chemicals getting exposed into your system would lead to cancers, right? And prolonged exposure, of course, would lead to death. These are very dangerous. So people in the West started looking at this as a major challenge, and they realized people have to phase out of this. Europe was the first. Of course, when it comes to green tech, Europe has been a good leader. So Europe came up with a program called the REACH. And under REACH, they put a ban on this chemical called hydrazine, which was the most dominant fuel in the world. So that kind of stirred the entire industry. People were hastily looking at other greener options. So new ideas started coming on what are the other greener alternatives available. And that's where we realized we have an opportunity there. We came up with a new fuel composition, which actually is completely green. You can handle it just like you're handling your disposable water cans. It's that safe, and you could touch it with your bare hands, no issues and no irritations as well. So this is something we believe is the fuel of the future. So we developed this green fuel in-house. Of course, US has developed a fuel which is exactly similar. I think US has been the leader. Basically, NASA did a mission in 2022 which actually demonstrated this in space. And I think we were the second after NASA to have demonstrated this in 2024. So I think that's where it stands. 2024, we had two missions, both of them fully successful, thanks to ISRO as well. We did that with ISRO on a PSLV rocket. So these were successful. That's something that we have developed on green fuel. And once we started developing this, we realized it's not just the fuel. You have to build a complete system. And if you're building a new fuel or a new chemical, there are things like sustainability issues, or rather, when you're developing something and calling it green, it's easy to kind of produce a small batch. But when you're scaling it up and really calling it green, you need to ensure that there are no contaminants even in very small particle sizes. Even minute, I'm saying 10 power minus 3, 10 power minus 6 levels. So kind of fine tuning these chemicals to that kind of purity levels is another challenge. So we have cracked all of that. And then there was another challenge. We realized people don't want to switch from toxic to green because the greener alternatives in the market were all giving you a lower performance, and you were already used to a system which gave you a certain benchmark in performance. So we had to also make this a high performance blend. So the thing is, now we are giving performance which is easily exceeding what the traditional industry standard already was giving.
And when you talk about the cost factor, is it able to meet
It's
the traditional?
almost the same.
Oh.
Almost the same. So that was one more target. Don't make it so expensive that people don't want to switch.
Yeah.
Right. Money plays an important role in any industry. And after that, we also realized there are also other technologies. One other thing was electric propulsion that I was talking about, right? The water as a fuel thing. And there is another electric propulsion called Hall effect thrusters that we have developed internally. All these electric systems are also green by nature. They are not using any toxic fuels. So that way we are a complete green propulsion company, green chemical fuel and green electric propulsion engines. So that's what we are doing. And other thing on green and sustainable thing is there is one major issue happening in the space industry, which is a threat of space debris. Right? You might have come across news that there was a debris which flew very close to some US satellite or things like that. So the problem with debris is, if one piece of unwanted space junk which is disintegrated and flying around in space, if it hits a satellite, there is a very good chance the satellite might break into 100 parts or even 10 parts for that matter, because these small pieces of junk are orbiting at 8 kilometers per second, 10 kilometers per second, right? It's like a super bullet. It can just shatter things. And once these small 10, 100 pieces start floating around in space, it's like they can go hit every other satellite. Over a period of time, every satellite in space might get impacted and your space can literally become unusable, which means our entire world's communication is shaken, gone in a month, right? So that's one of the major challenges. To prevent that, you need these kinds of propulsion engines as a mandate on every satellite. So 2024, a new mandate has been enforced in the US from FCC, which says every satellite going to space needs to have a mechanism to deorbit itself and control and avoid such debris collisions. So that's one step towards sustainability, and all our engines are designed to do that function. And we should be able to even deorbit existing things, and that's done through propulsion. So we are working in that direction, making space sustainable on a long term.
Yashas, India has also very recently come up with the space debris policy. How do you assess that document? Do you think there's scope for improvement? And do you think that private players such as yourself who are working in this domain can add to India's larger ambitions of a cleaner space flight?
Yeah. So I had been reviewing the Indian space policy drafts and all of that. There is definitely a angle that has come in with regard to space debris, right? We are definitely in line with rest of the world is suggesting, like what Europe suggests or what US suggests. And definitely it's a step in the right direction. I think eventually going forward, it could be a little more harder enforcement could come in. Like the same thing that I told you US has done. I think we could follow a similar model, because Indian satellites also have to be very responsible, right? If it goes with an Indian tag, we need to ensure that we are not hitting a US satellite. It just simply creates a lot of liability. If a satellite is going down, the insurance is going to bleed, literally bleed. So we need to have these kinds of propulsion tech to ensure that every Indian satellite going out there must deorbit.
Coming back to your journey with Bellatrix, you said that you guys started off around 2012. The Indian space policy was nowhere in the picture back then. That the government started opening up the space much later.
Yeah.
So, could you, for our viewers, tell us how the initial part of the journey was? Just breaking the glass ceiling, because now, time and again, when we speak of the space policy, we say that the space sector itself was just ISRO,
Yeah.
and you guys are the foremost players in the private market right now. So how was it to crack this space? And this is also maybe helpful for a lot of the new entrepreneurs who are
Yeah.
trying to get into the space. So if you could just tell our viewers about how that initial breaking the
Yeah.
glass ceiling
Yeah.
was for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we call this the first mover
Yes.
disadvantage, right? So if you are the first in a particular sector, you will have to crack everything else, create the formulas, try everything, and then get the right path to everybody else coming into the sector. I think we were part of that. And we are also happy that I think it was a much more pleasurable journey trying to solve more problems there. But I think talking about that policy front, yes, as you rightly mentioned, I think space policy was non-existent. We unofficially started in 2012 as students, officially incorporated in 2015. And the space policy mention kind of came as part of the COVID relief package. The 2 lakh crore COVID relief package also said space sector is going to open up and that's going to add to the economic impact and all of that, right? So that actually technically came in March 2020. So for almost 8 years, we were living in a sector where there was a lot of disbelief within the sector. If we went to an investor would ask, would ISRO really entertain you guys, or would the government want to have space companies? And of course, today we know how supportive they are, both government and ISRO. But I think that was the kind of times. And also, if somebody said, we want to launch a satellite, we want to launch a launch vehicle, there is no line in the policy document or any of the generic industry protocols that people refer to, right? Which actually says that a private company can launch a satellite. It was a gray area. It's not said that it is illegal, but it's also not said that you can take the authority to launch something in space from an Indian soil. So it was a gray area, and if you were to start a business in that, investors would first point that and ask, you show me where it says whatever you're doing is legal, right? So that was another level of challenge. But I think today things have changed, and especially thanks to the government's initiative on starting in space. That was a out of box idea, I would say, right? It was a startup worthy idea that you get somebody who is outside of ISRO come lead a organization, somebody who would kind of play that balancing act between what ISRO needs, what industry needs, and what is already available as assets and as probably packages, financial incentives, put everything together and actually promote a sector. So I would say this has to be a case study, and really things have worked good, right? After InSpace has come, I think a lot of ISRO's facilities have opened up for private sectors. When we started, that was not there, so we were forced to take loans on our personal properties, get some facilities ourselves. But today startups can literally go use ISRO's facilities just like that. And also maybe when it comes to policy, now we have complete clarity. It's not a gray area, rather it's an area that government is putting all the green flags to, right? They want Indian companies to do it. They want Indian companies to build products in India, have R&D in India, manufacture for the world here. And InSpace has actually published a report which says India currently kind of acquires less than 2% of the global space market. As you said, it's just ISRO. But I think the target with InSpace coming into action is basically to enable private companies to start exporting, getting more revenue into the country, and go from 2% to nearly 10%, which would kind of hit the numbers to almost $44 billion from less than 2 billion ISRO budget, which government is actually spending, right? From 2 billion spent to 44 billion in overall industry value. So this is something they are targeting by 2035, right? Which I think is really good number. And really we have the opportunity because globally India is not far too behind. If I were to put such targets in say semiconductor, I needed a solid roadmap because semiconductor game is not easy. It requires a huge investment and all that. And the world has gone very far away for us to play the catch-up game. But here, space industry, it is not the case. We are in line with what others are doing, and we really have that potential to even exceed the target of 44 billion. So I think it's a step in the right direction, and government is playing all the right cards and putting this sector to the limelight.
Yashas, Bellatrix has very recently also expanded its operations in the US. Congratulations for that.
Thanks.
But we also want to know that, since India has been stressing this Make in India, Make for India, rule among the private startups that are operating in this space, why did Bellatrix find the need to find a market in the US? What is the larger, objective of the company expanding its operations abroad?
Yeah, so India is basically a new emerging space player. And we as a company, we already have developed our products completely, and we are already in the market trying to sell to actual missions we are going to space. So if I were to look at just the Indian market, it would definitely take me some time, and the market size is still limited because there are emerging players who are still building the tech, they're getting their funding rounds done and all of that. So I cannot be a company which just focuses on the Indian market. And space as a sector is global. There are so many partnerships happening across the world in this sector to actually make things which were earlier impossible, right? So that way, if you look at the sector breakdown in terms of revenues and the money or orders available, I would say more than 50% of the market is currently in the US. So US becomes a strategic market for anybody well versed in the space sector, and we cannot miss that out because we are an Indian company. So we really need to look at focusing on a global footprint. So US definitely is that step for us, and we have just started working with existing US commercial players trying to fulfill their constellation order requirements. There are multiple constellations going up. There are companies which want to launch 300 satellites, 400 satellites, and we want to have our propulsion flying on those. So we are having this entity there. And also the reason to have that kind of entity and presence is something similar to why a US company want to have presence in India, right? For you to penetrate a market and then give that trust to a customer that you are there with them, you really have to be physically present. That's the reason we took that.
Could you tell our viewers a little bit about what your US expansion is? What kind of work is, how is the expertise going to be divided between your presence in the US and in India?
Yeah, right now I think we have a sales team there which has started selling our systems to the existing US market. But I think eventually we would also want to manufacture some parts in the US. Yeah, it may be a little unconventional because we are all moving towards Make in India because of the costs and all of that. But at the same time, I think having that in the US really helps us give a assurance to our customers that there are some things which are really made in the US and there is also some value creation. So that is something that we are looking at, and that is something as as a thing that we are trying to streamline within this year. So 2025 is crucial for us to also start up that US manufacturing.
Yashas, we are speaking to you on a day where the Axiom 4 mission, has culminated. Indian Air Force Group Captain Shubhandru Shukla is back on Earth, and safely so. So I really can't let you go without answering this question because the Axiom 4 mission is something which was like more or less led by private companies, right? SpaceX, which has already established itself as as the leading global player in this segment. Axiom 4, with Axiom Space, which is also one of the upcoming companies, 4 out of 4 human space flights successfully done. And now they're also building the next space station by 2030 is what we know for now. Do you see an Indian player, maybe lead a mission on the lines of say an Axiom 4, because we also have Gaganyaan, which is under preparation. So how do you see the private players in the Indian market? Do you see something on the lines of Axiom 4 happening in India as well in the coming future?
Well, that's a tricky question. I have mixed thoughts on that. Ideally, my heart says there have to be a lot of Indian players who venture into space, and at least one or two players who are succeeding in doing something like this. But if the reality starts striking, I realize to actually pull off something like this, the kind of investment would go into starting with few hundreds of millions to over a couple of billions, right? That kind of money available within India is, at least in the next 5 to 10 years, looks very hazy, right? And the business model also kind of comes in. People start thinking, if SpaceX is doing quite a lot of that and Axiom has already put 4 missions successfully, why would I want to fund you $1 billion to actually do that, right? So that way, I think it has its own challenges. So I think Indian space companies have to be really choosy, and you need to get that frugal approach even in terms of choosing the right business model. So I think here definitely there is opportunity and scope for Indian companies to really do that, and there are, I personally know Indian startups which are aspiring and working in this direction. They're really doing a good job. But I think when it comes to funding and business scalability, there could be challenges being an Indian company, simply because the investor ecosystem works differently here, right? So I would like to leave it at that.
Okay, so my last question to
Mm.
you before we wrap up this interview is that how do you see the next decade to be like for, for the Indian space industry at large, and also, India's space ambitions?
Mm.
Because we do have a roadmap which says that, we want to land a human on the
Mm.
moon by 2035, by 2040, by 2035, we want to build our own space
Space
station.
station. Yeah.
So how do you see the next decade to be like?
Yeah, I think with regard to landing person on the moon and space station, I'm sure ISRO has figured things out, and I mean, I've personally seen a lot of work which is happening within ISRO to really do that. So it's a serious project mode thing happening in ISRO. So I'm really confident that should happen, and ISRO is going to fly in great colors as it always does. But I want to kind of focus the discussion more on what the private company should be doing, right? There are 3 4 different verticals here. Broadly, to kind of put it, there is something called upstream and downstream. Upstream kind of talks about all the infrastructure and things like launch vehicles, satellite manufacturing, and spare parts for, or parts and components for satellites, and all of these kinds of manufacturing related things. Basically, upstream talks about technologies which kind of are associated with putting things to space, all the hardware bits. And there is something called downstream, which is basically extracting the applications or value from space. Basically, you have all these assets, but if there are no companies which can get meaningful output out of that, or say you have a lot of imagery data, if there is no company which can readily use that image, process it in the right way, give meaningful intelligence to, say, Indian Defense for Operation Sindoor, right? If that is not there, that market is always kind of oversupplied, and then the train doesn't go, right. On one side you are pushing and sending so many assets to space, on the other side there is nobody who is extracting value out of it and creating more demand. To create more demand, you have to use it wisely. So that is the downstream segment, where a lot of new companies have just started to come. So in India, if you look at it, I feel there are a lot of upstream companies now. So the Indian startup ecosystem, if you look at it, when we started, there were probably 3 space startups, and probably nobody working on building their own products. So there were companies which wanted to build or manufacture ISRO's parts, but when it comes to building their own tech, there were probably none, right? We were probably the first ones there. But I think today, if you look at it, there are over 300 companies, and all the 300 companies are working towards building their own products. So the upstream is kind of getting populated and it is moving in the right direction. But in downstream, there are probably a handful of companies which are doing meaningful business ideas. So there is a lot of scope. And if you talk to government departments right now, the government departments may not know what a satellite can offer to them. So these companies must have a very good marketing team which understands how the government is working, what are the technologies they are currently using, and go approach and tell them that these satellite data could add so much more value, bring in so much more efficiency, and the government would see so much value creation with this. So once that starts happening, different ministries would indirectly start supporting Indian space companies in creating more assets for India, which eventually would lead to more development for the country. So we need more companies in this downstream segment in the country, right? This is what I think even the former ISRO chairman, Dr. Somnath, also mentioned in quite a few talks. And I also have the same belief. So this is where India should go. And also coming to the hardware side of things, there would be definitely consolidation, but I would really say that there are really good companies which are getting created. Of course, there could be some noise, but really some good solid companies. So we would probably see some consolidation, but some great companies coming out in next 5 to 10 years from India.
Thank you so much, Yashas, for speaking with us and taking time out for this interview. Thank you to our viewers for tuning in for this interview. For more such science content, keep tuning in to The Print.
Thank you.